the other. Now, our first speaker is Barbara Lehman. We had a lovely conversation the other day. She's a professor at Western Washington University in psychology. She is a social health psychologist whose research focuses on stress and coping. Dr. Lehman teaches, mentors students, and has authored over 20 peer-reviewed publications in such periodicals as Social and Personality, Psychology Compass, PLOS 1, Religion, Brain and Behavior, Psychosomatic Medicine, and Health Psychology. Her most recent work attempts to draw traditional Buddhist philosophical teachings together with research in psychology. For example, her 2025 Compass article entitled How Meditation Promotes Well-Being, Applying a Dual System Theory, discusses how both research and philosophy suggest that meditation operates both by reducing emotionally charged mental processes and by promoting decentered mental states. Okay, so maybe we'll hear some of that. But there are other adventures to be had. Welcome, Barbara Lehman.
All right, so thank you for staying here until the very end of this lovely marathon of a conference. I am very appreciative to the organizers, and honestly, this has been just wonderful to hear all of what you have to say and to have so many nice conversations with everyone, so thank you for being here. The work I'm talking about now is actually not my primary area of research. It was nicely described there what my primary area is, but in fact, it's another area, and it's an area of social psychology that I've always found to be kind of weird. And as I started to learn more about Buddhism, I thought it seemed even weirder. And so I thought it would be a fun and an interesting thing to discuss with you today. So that's what I'm doing here today. I come from Bellingham, Washington, so in the far upper left corner of the US. So I'm going to open with two different quotes, one from Patrul Rinpoche, from the words of my perfect teacher. And he says, "Once born, every human in the world is sure to die, but how, when, and where we are going to die cannot be predicted. None of us can say for sure that our death will come about at a particular time or place, in a certain way, or as a result of this or that cause. There is no guarantee that death will not suddenly strike right now." He goes on to say that we should think about death and impermanence for a long time. Once you are certain that you are going to die, you will no longer find it hard to put aside harmful actions, nor difficult to do what is right. After that, meditate for a long time on love and compassion. Once love fills your heart, you will no longer find it hard to act for the benefit of others. And we know that there are a lot of Buddhist writings on this topic, on the importance of considering death and mortality. But the contrasting view that I'm going to share with you right now is one from American writer and activist James Baldwin, who says, "Life is tragic simply because the earth turns and the sun inexorably rises and sets. And one day for each of us, the sun will go down for the last time. Perhaps the whole root of our trouble, the human trouble, is that we will sacrifice all the beauty of our lives, will imprison ourselves in totems, taboos, crosses, armies, flags, nations, in order to deny the fact of death, which is the only fact we have." So here, Baldwin is saying that people take false refuge. They're so afraid of the very idea of death that they'll take false refuge in things like nationalism, war, hatred. And indeed, this is the research I'm going to share with you today. It's research that's very well prominent in experimental social psychology. So there are well over 1,000 peer-reviewed published articles on the topic of terror management theory. And so the idea of terror management theory is that thoughts of death evoke terror and extreme death anxiety. And it's so horrifying that humans work to suppress those thoughts as quickly as they can. But we know from a lot of research, and also some people have mentioned it in this group, that we're not very good as humans at suppressing emotions. So it doesn't work. So to help compensate for that, what happens is we work other ways, subconsciously, to build a sense of immortality. And what the theory suggests is that people work to defend their cultural worldviews. So this is kind of espousing things that are consistent with what you value, and also boost your own personal self-worth, self-esteem. So trying to make it seem like you're a good person who's been doing the right things, and that even when you die, the world will go on after you. You'll have a legacy. So indeed, tests of terror management theory usually take the form of studies of mortality salience. And the word mortality salience just means reminders that human lives are finite, that they will end. And these can be naturally occurring, or most often they're studied by asking people to think about their own death. So naturally occurring occasions when you see elevations in mortality salience occur, say, with times of war, natural disaster, things like this. However, most of the research, most of these thousands of studies, has experimentally manipulated mortality salience. And what that means is you have research participants, often college sophomores, often American college sophomores, who come into a research lab and they're asked to write. In the mortality salience conditions, they write about their own death, the fact that it's going to happen, what's going to happen to their body, and what emotions that makes them feel. And then there's a control or a different condition. And in those conditions, people write usually about dental pain. So dental pain, how that'll feel, and what emotions that brings up. So both people are writing. And then people are given the opportunity to defend their worldview. And indeed, consistent with this theory, people who have written about their own mortality report more prejudice against people they see as unlike them. They report more bias, so more bias in favor of people who are like them, and more bias against people who are dislike them. So also more likely to discriminate, more likely to report boosts in self-esteem, more likely even to say they're interested in romantic relationships and want to have children. So all of this is consistent with the idea that people are trying to build a sense of personal legacy. So there's, like I said, lots of research on this, and there have been a lot of summary studies, so meta-analyses where they're kind of aggregating across all of these. And researchers have, rightly so, developed a lot of criticisms of this line of research. And I'm highlighting just two of them here. One is, as I mentioned, that most of this research is conducted with American college students. So the idea that there could be cultural differences or worldview differences that might affect these patterns is not really well elaborated. And this is particularly a problem because in these synthesis articles, you see that the effects of mortality salience are largest for Americans, and they're largest for young adults. So they're doing the research where the effects are the biggest. And then I could say more about aspects of the theory that haven't been tested, but I'm not going to. So here's the reason I thought this was especially relevant, aside from the irony of it all, to bring with you today, is that there are some articles looking at the role of mindfulness and also meditation on mortality salience. And so one line of research from 2010, one article, talks about measures of trait mindfulness, so they get self-reports from people on how much they feel like they're able to attend to the present moment. And what they found was that people who are higher in mindfulness didn't have the same effects of mortality salience. And so what you see there is that for people who are low in mindfulness, those in the mortality salience condition, so this top line here, the blue line, defend their worldview more. So they kind of have more pro-US bias. And those who are in the control condition show less. But for people who are higher in self-reported mindfulness, you don't see that same pattern. There's no difference based on what people wrote about. In addition, a series of studies that were published in 2019 looked at meditation, and they randomly assigned people to meditate and looked at a number of different samples, some people from Korea, some people who were Buddhists, etc. And what they found was that following mortality salience, so the writing exercise, Koreans and Americans who meditated didn't show the differences that I just have been describing. And so here you can see in the left graph, in the Korean sample, those who did not meditate but who wrote about their own mortality reported more pro-Korean biases. And you see the same thing in the other figure for US sample. But when people were asked to meditate for 15 minutes, and importantly, these are not experienced meditators. These are just people novices. They don't know much, they were just given instruction. And what you see there is there's no difference between those two lines in terms of what people wrote about, whether or not they reported relatively more bias, and neither in the US nor in Korea. And then, like I said, they sampled a lot of different groups. They had a group of mostly Zen Buddhist monks who reported meditating 3 or more hours a day. And they had some of them write about their own mortality. And so these two lines on the far left don't differ based on whether or not they wrote about their own mortality or something else. You don't see any effects of mortality salience for Buddhists who have meditated. You don't see any effects for Buddhists who have not meditated. You also don't see it for Buddhists who have meditated, for non-Buddhists who have meditated. So the only group among all of those where you see that mortality salience leads to the biases I was describing were non-Buddhists who didn't meditate. Okay. So it seems that there's a clear relationship between meditation, Buddhism, mindfulness, in terms of reducing these effects or the negative consequences of thinking about one's own mortality. And forward, okay. That looks strange. Okay, so why might this be? Why might there be a relationship between mindfulness and meditation and mortality salience? And there's actually some research suggesting there are lots of reasons for this. So one thing is that those who meditate tend to have less death anxiety. We also know that people who think about death, so some death education practices and those sorts of things, that promotes mindfulness. So there are bidirectional relationships here among these concepts. We also know from research that meditation tends to reduce afflictive emotions, right? That's the point of what a lot of us are doing here, trying to reduce those afflictive emotions. So we know that meditation can facilitate the idea that you are not the contents of your mind, right? We're separate from the contents of our mind. And so the ability to see that is really important. Meditation can also reduce attempts to suppress, reduce anxiety, reduce rumination. And all of these processes seem to be very related to the causes of mortality salience, the biases that come from that. So, and this is more my area of research, typical area. Okay, of course, we also know that Buddhist writings have a lot to say on this topic. So, in contrast to the idea that the thought of death is so terrifying that we need to eliminate it from our brain, most Buddhist writings suggest that we should think about death. We should meditate on death, like it was said in the quote from Patrul Rinpoche. And these writings suggest that are there in the Pali Canon, so describing the Shakyamuni Buddha as deathless, meaning not afraid of the death of this present body. And there's a Tibetan saying that says, "It is better to fear death now and die fearlessly than to avoid fear of death now and die with terror." And we know that His Holiness the Dalai Lama meditates on his own death multiple times a day. So it's all throughout. I didn't have to look far to come up with these sources. So from a Buddhist perspective, it makes sense to build thoughts of death into your daily activities. And Daejeon Rinpoche says, even since yesterday, your lifespan has shortened. That is obviously true, right? So there are a lot of people here who know a lot more about this than I do, but my understanding is that meditation on death helps to increase our understanding of impermanence. Everything changes. Human lives change. People come and go. And this can help to reduce the fundamental attachment we have to ourselves and to other people and get away from this fundamental ignorance and also promote compassion. So I'm astonished that the bell hasn't rung yet. I'm a little nervous. When I went so, it was.
You've been going about 12 minutes.
I'm talking very quickly, I guess.
You're doing well.
Well, I'm almost done. I've just got a Milarepa quote, and then I'm done. So maybe we'll get us out of here a little earlier. Okay. So to close with Milarepa, in the horror of death, I took to the mountains. Again and again, I meditated on the uncertainty of the hour of death, capturing the fortress of the deathless, unending nature of mind. Now all fear of death is over and done. So thank you. I'm happy to talk more.